All right, today we're going to dig into a really fascinating study that peels back the layers on how Mexican companies are actually spending their money on innovation. You know, the headlines often tell one story, but when you look at the data from inside these companies, well, it paints a much more interesting picture.
So, let's kick things off with the big question that always seems to be floating around. When you look at the global stage, it's easy to think that Mexico's innovation spending just isn't keeping up. But is that really the whole picture?
And at first glance, yeah, the national data seems to confirm that fear. Mexico's spending on R&D is only about 0.5% of its GDP. When you put that next to the OECD average, it looks pretty low. It's a statistic that honestly doesn't look great.
And that right there, that's the big puzzle we're going to piece together today. If the national numbers look so weak, what's really going on at ground level? You know, inside the very companies that are supposed to be driving this stuff forward. To find out, we have to look past that big national average.
The key to unlocking this whole thing is a metric called total intramural expenditure, or TI for short. Now, this is way more than just a fancy acronym. This number tells us how much money companies are actually spending on their own internal R&D. This is the real, on-the-ground data we've been looking for.
Okay, and this is where the story takes a massive turn, because the second we shift our focus away from that national GDP figure and zoom in on this internal company spending, the TI, the whole narrative just flips on its head.
Let's put some numbers on it so you can see what I mean. Back in 2014, which is our starting point here, Mexican companies invested almost 13.6 billion pesos in their own innovation projects. Not a bad place to start, right?
But then, the very next year, boom, that number jumps by over 9%. That's a pretty healthy leap, and it shows these companies were feeling confident enough to invest more.
And it doesn't stop there. In 2016, the growth actually speeds up, jumping by almost 17%. See? This isn't just a one-off bump. It's a clear, powerful upward trend.
So let's just be super clear about what this means. While the big national headline number looks kind of stagnant, the reality on the ground was one of strong, accelerating investment. This is the first huge piece of our puzzle, and it suggests the story is way more optimistic than it seems.
But it gets even more complicated, because that strong overall growth is really just an average, and it's hiding some wildly different stories depending on which industry you look at. Not everyone was moving in the same direction.
To really get this, let's look at two totally different players in this economic story. You've got the steady, reliable manufacturer, and then you've got the volatile, unpredictable miner. Their approaches to innovation, as you're about to see, could not be more different. First up, manufacturing. Think of this sector as the workhorse of the story. It posted really strong and, more importantly, consistent growth in what it was spending on innovation. An almost 12% increase one year, followed by a 16% increase the next. Just solid, steady progress.
And you can see exactly what they were focused on. In 2016, they poured their money, over 8.4 billion pesos, into developing new products. That's way more than they spent on new processes. Their strategy was all about making new things to sell.
And then you've got the mining sector. Wow, talk about a roller coaster. A mind-blowing 205% surge in innovation spending in 2015, followed by a huge 35% drop the very next year. This is a classic story of boom and bust, not that steady growth we saw before.
But hold on, as wild as that is, neither of those stories, not the steady manufacturer or the volatile miner, can prepare you for the most surprising finding in this entire study. One sector's growth was just completely off the charts.
I'm talking about the construction sector. In 2015, it saw a massive jump in innovation spending, nearly 70%. And that's impressive on its own, but really, that was just the warm-up. Because in 2016, it went completely supernova. Innovation spending in construction grew by an unbelievable 360% in a single year. This one sector's insane leap totally changed the game during this period.
Now, obviously, this isn't all happening in a bubble, right? These companies aren't just acting on their own. The government is a big part of this story, too, offering support that can really shape these decisions.
So, the government's main agency for science and tech, CONACYT, was giving out a lot of grant money. And we can see that the state of Nuevo Leon was getting the biggest piece of the pie, which makes sense given its focus on R&D. Meanwhile, over in Mexico City, it was the little guys, the small businesses that got the most support. But then there's a little mystery here. For some reason, the support levels dipped in 2017.
Something to look into for sure.
Okay, so let's take a step back and put all these pieces of our puzzle together. We've seen the kind of misleading national number, the strong growth underneath, and the huge differences between industries. So what's the final verdict here?
Well, the verdict is pretty clear. The story of Mexican innovation isn't one of standing still. It's a story of complex, dynamic growth happening from the inside out. The reality is, this mosaic of different paths, some are steady, some are volatile, and some are just explosive. But the single most important thing to take away is that a critical mass of Mexican companies are choosing to bet big on innovation to compete on the world stage.
And that leaves us with one last really important question. If every sector is on its own unique journey, from manufacturing to mining to construction, what's the best way to support them all? It's pretty obvious that a one-size-fits-all policy just isn't going to cut it. The path forward has to be smart enough to adapt to all these different stories.
And hey, for anyone who wants to dive deeper into the numbers and see the methodology for themselves, the full academic paper that this whole explainer is based on is right here on your screen. It's definitely worth a read if you want to get into the nitty-gritty.